A deep, penetrating dive into the plasma pool. Ugh, that's disgusting. I'm John Renton with the retro review of The Fly for 1986. One of David Cronenberg's most revered movies because it was a reimagining slash remake slash amped up version of the 1950s classic Help Me, Help Me. Apparently Jeff Goldblum actually wrote to Vincent Price and said, I hope you like this one as much as I liked yours. Vincent Price was very touched by that and apparently said this is very good, even though it went a little bit far. But it was the 80s, a decade of excess. It was the 80s where people did a lot of coke and voted for Ronald Reagan. And if you get that, I love you guys. So yeah, David Cronenberg. Go look at his filmography. David Cronenberg had to have the most unusual childhood in order to come up with this shit. And no wonder his kids have developed their own filmmaking careers that have kind of been a little bit like their dad. But that being said, it's also written by Charles Edward Pogue, or Pogue, however you say it. Sounds like a name way too snooty to be involved in an 80s gritty, grimy, and Goldblummy version of The Fly. Jeff Goldblum plays Seth Brundle, who ends up talking to a journalist named Veronica Quaife that I did not read as Queef, how dare you say that, played by Gina Davis, who, you know, Gina Davis actually was quite the looker back then, not knocking her now, but I didn't realize that at the time when I was watching movies like this. And Gina Davis is doing a story on him. She ends up recording his stuff that basically has to do with teleporting objects from just basically one pod to another, telepods as it were, telepod, telephone, telefly on the wall. No, I was not going to do a rendition of Miley Cyrus's Fly on the Wall. As tempting as that was, I cannot hit that beat. I also cannot hit that pace. So, she also has an old flame named Stathis, or Stathis, however the hell you say it. I'm just going to say Stathis, homeostasis, that's it. John gets, I guess he gets what he had coming to him a little bit later. David Cronenberg also plays a gynecologist. You know, I knew a gynecologist with asthma. He could only catch his breath in snatches. This had a $15 million budget, $44.3 million in today's money, $7 million opening, $20.6 million in today's money. So we're basically almost going three times. $40.4 million U.S.-Canada gross. That is $119.4 million in today's dollars. $60.6 million worldwide gross. So it was successful overseas. $179.1 million in today's money. Essentially, Seth wants to basically bring this to market. He works with Bartok Industries. Wasn't that the name of the frickin' winged creature in Anastasia? Am I thinking otherwise? Nevertheless. Anastasia, there's an old, 1990s animated movie that nobody talks about. I think I'm one of the first people to ever mention that, at least in the last little bit. So, after a brief meeting, there is a romance. He ends up trying to teleport himself. There is an unexpected passenger. Bingo bango, we have Jeff Goldblum fused with a fly. That's it. That's pretty much your deal right there. If you couldn't figure that out from The Fly, if you somehow have not seen this movie, that's about your spoiler-free premise right there. It does feature some really good body horror effects. It features Jeff Goldblum, probably in pounds of uncomfortable makeup, and Gina Davis doing way more crying than I think somebody should do in this situation. And let's be honest, John gets what he has coming to him. As a John, I feel that I am more than worthy of not having that same fate, except I probably am. And realistically, it's just a sci-fi body horror movie with excess in the 80s. I mean, people might compare this to The Thing, John Carpenter's Thing. Gross. Many would argue The Thing was better. I will give my opinion on The Thing at some point. Maybe I will retro-review that after The Thing from Another World. This isn't the greatest, 80s horror movie, in my personal opinion. Not even the great 80s body horror movie. There is the arm wrestling scene. There's where he's walking on the ceiling like he's Lionel Richie. And then the melting away where we reveal the Fly character. And look, there's really good stuff in this. I just think that for a 96-minute movie, it almost has a little too much padding, which is ironic because this movie is somewhat briskly paced. So there's a baboon in this that apparently was difficult to work with, but after establishing dominance and basically Goldblum, being 6'4", and having a bond with the baboon was easier to work with. It's a fucking baboon, so it's not actually easy to work with. But What am I working on? I'm working on something that'll change the world and human life as we know it. That would also lead to a sequel a couple of years later that was so badly received that nobody from this wanted to be in it. I mean, it would have been hard for Jeff Goldblum to be in it on account of him having died at the end of this. Sorry, this is a bit of a, well, it's a spoiler review. It's also a near 40-year-old movie. In the 80s, when you could buy a, industrial warehouse for pennies on the dollar, especially in Detroit. Thanks, Reagan. So, Bartok Industries, I just can't get over that. That has to be the name of the goddamn winged creature. Was it a bat? Was it a bat? No, that was Batty from Fern Gully. What the fuck was Bartok? Was he a bat? Should have researched this, but I didn't think about it until the review. And then he basically comes with the idea to teleport himself. Meanwhile, Homostasis is coming up with a bit of exposition about Seth. He says that he almost won the Nobel Prize at 20. You know who else didn't win the Nobel Prize? Ha! Ha ha ha! Didn't win the Peace Prize because he's not a person of peace. Somebody in Venezuela did. I believe it was Venezuela. So, yeah, the baboon gets teleported, and it's a pile of skin and bones and guts. Good body horror effects right there. Boom! Romance 20 minutes in. Gina Davis would have been hard to resist when she was 30. And possibly when she was 50. I'm not here to judge. So, he does end up, while they're in bed, he ends up with like a cut on his back because there's a microchip thing. Oh, I wonder where that was. It's like, the Naked Gun. It's like, oh, your bracelet. Oh, did it slip down there again? It's around her ankle. How would that physically work? Whatever. It's fine. So, he teleports Steak. And it turns out the non-teleport Steak is good, but the other one is kind of gamey. Golden Corral's new slogan. I've watched too much riff tracks, ladies and gentlemen. The computer basically needs to be taught about, instead of just trying to recreate flesh, actually understanding it because it's an 80s computer. He uses voice activation for this thing. More on that in a bit. And the baboon works this time, and the baboon is very happy, mainly because it's out of that container, and they're going to go on vacation to celebrate, except no. Homostasis basically takes her story and ends up running with it. And then Seth, about a third of the way through, teleports himself. Everything's fine, except it's not, because there was a fly in there. And then he starts to get a little bit jealous, like, oh, oh no, it's just, an ex-boyfriend, stuff like that. And the fly was caught. That was kind of funny. And then I was like, wait a second, how'd you get in here? Well, it's a fly. Flies do get in houses. God, do they ever. And then he suddenly is super strong and doing extreme Pilates and flipping around. And man, during the fact that they were able to cut away from the stuntman, anything's possible. I'm not saying that Jeff Goldblum wasn't doing some of this stuff, but there were parts where I'm like, whew, boy, at least it's not like True Lies where Arnold Schwarzenegger was going down that hill and it was obviously a goddamn stuntman. Should have shot that better, James Cameron. But they get to a lot of sex, lots of sex. Basically, he is insatiable. Again, Gina Davis in 1986. Kind of can understand it. And she ends up getting pregnant, which would lead to the sequel that was really, really badly received. So badly received that I actually just checked to see if it was available anywhere, and it is not available even on Amazon to rent. So, there we are. He ends up kind of pursuing the idea of her going through the teleport, or the telepod. She doesn't want to, so he kicks her out. You have a chance with Gina Davis in 1986 and you kick her out of your apartment. What the fuck is wrong with you, Goldblum? But then he talks about a deep penetrating dive into the plasma pool. Boy, that's what she said. She didn't like when I referred to her as a plasma pool, but I digress. The arm wrestling scene is one of the most memorable scenes of this, where he's wrestling a guy, he starts secreting stuff, and then snaps his arm. I remember the arm snapping a little bit more, but whatever. That was kind of bad. And then he had this lady that they went bar hopping with and kind of treated her a little bit like a whore, as Stu Hart would say, and tells her, oh, don't be afraid. It's like, do it, be very afraid. Be twice as afraid. No. So the lady runs off. I don't know if she ever went on to really have much of a career, but it's like, she was cute. And then as he starts, having more issues, he realizes that he's very diseased. He ends up essentially having to admit that he fucked up. He does more research. My telepod turned into a gene splicer. He is a literal fly on the wall, as I point out. And as she is trying to determine whether she should get rid of the kids, Stathis is trying to help. Jeff Goldblum's kind of fading. He ends up, Goldblum does, calling her, and, he's diseased, but then he realizes this could be a gift. Well, no, it's not, but whatever. He can't get into his own computer unless he does a manual override because of the voice, his nails, his teeth, all that stuff's falling out. The only way he can eat is to secrete, the stuff that flies secrete on the stuff to melt it down and everything. Corrosive. Kind of disgusting. Hence the title, that's disgusting when he throws up on the donut. And insects don't, don't make good politicians. They don't compromise or none of that stuff. I want to be the first insect politician. He'd still run the country better than the current piece of shit we have. And I'll hurt you if you stay. Also Golden Corral's new slogan. And she wants to get rid of it. We're about, 15 minutes from the end of the movie, roughly. When she's in an office late at night, there's a man named Brent that just doesn't want to do an abortion this late. Oh, classic Brent, not wanting to do his damn job. Who's Brent? I have no idea. And suddenly Seth swings in like a fly version of Frankenstein, Flykenstein as it were, and takes her back there and says, that baby's the only thing left of me. I do recall seeing The Fly too, and it's just it just made no sense. It was just so badly done. But he takes her back to the industrial warehouse for pennies on the dollar. Stathis has a gun, gets freaked out by Goldblum turning into a fly, and instead of shooting him, gets his hand melted off, his foot melted off, so now he's like Carrie Von Erich, if Carrie Von Erich also lost his hand. And because this was 86, it makes sense. Especially if it was after June 4th of 86. And then he throws her into the pod and is going to do a thing where they're going to fuse and then come apart. I guess they're going to do a fusion. It's going to be like a human centipede, a human flyapede, as it were. But then Stathis somehow has the ability to shoot the cord, the long industrial strength cord that can be taken out by a single bullet. And now, as, Goldblum, the fly, Brundle fly, the man, the myth, the fly, the legend, tries to get out of the deal. He ends up fused with the pod, the door's in him, and he's, he's not doing well because he's fused with a fucking pod. And he basically takes the gun and says, just do this. Kurt Cobain said the same thing to Courtney Love. So, moving on from that, he wants her to do it because she's like crying like this. You can't save him. What are you going to do? Fuse him with another person? Like it's the fucking ferryman with the goddamn knife. That's a deep cut reference. I forgot all about that movie till now. And then she ends up crying way too much and then shoots him. Lesson I remember, but it still seemed to take a while. And then that's it. So seemingly Stathis is fine. I hope they put his or his detached foot on ice and maybe they were able to reattach it. They couldn't for Carrie Von Erich. But yeah, that is The Fly. Pretty fun. It's not necessarily the best body horror movie ever, like some people have said. But I enjoyed it. So there we go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rentlin, and until we are a fly on the wall again, happy trails to you.